It's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague Ellen Helsper from the Department of Media and Communications. Ellen is going to talk on the very important topic of social media and focus on the value and practice of social networks and social media in education. Before I hand over to Ellen, I should just say that we will need to finish the session at 4:25. Ellen says she's going to need plenty of time for questions at the end, so don't worry. Ellen, thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Right, it's great to be here and to be presenting myself this time. I've been to a few of the Network Ed sessions and they've always been very stimulating and interesting, so let's hope I can do the same for you. I will go through this presentation, which is a collection of my thoughts, research that I've done, but also I will try to insert examples of my own teaching where I've used social media and kind of relate that to the topic of discussion today. Obviously, if you have any questions or anything, I think either if they're big questions, save them to the end. If they're questions about what's going on at the moment, then please do ask. Interactive media, interactive session, even if it's face-to-face. Right. So what I was going to talk to you about now is when I was thinking about how to organize this talk, I was thinking like actually we can't really talk about either social media or about education without first also realizing what the internet in general does in our everyday lives, how it's embedded. Same thing about education. Education is not a standalone thing, something that we do and then we go home and education's over. It's part of our everyday lives. So what I wanted to do first is talk you through a little bit of the research and the things that I've been looking at in relation to the internet and everyday life in general. And then about the internet and education. Then move more towards social media and everyday life and what we understand by it and what some of the problems might be with that. And then move on to social media and education. I will finish with some practical examples, some things that I've been experiencing in a course that I teach here at the LSE. And I'll introduce you to that course right at the beginning so that you know where the other material is coming from. And for those of you who are at LSE, you know this platform. It's Moodle. This is the Moodle platform of my course. The course is called Interpersonal Mediated Communications. And because it's all about mediated interpersonal communication, I figured that this should be a course in which we use media to communicate and to learn, and in particular social media. So I'm just going to give you a sense of what the elements are of this course. This course has a wiki, which I'll show you in 1 minute. It has discussion fora. In this course, we split it out between discussion fora about the actual wiki that the students created and discussion fora which were more about the particular course, the course in general. I set up a delicious tag, a feed, in which when I was reading things that come across on the internet, I would tag them. They would show up on the left-hand side. You know, obviously the idea is that students would do the same, but you can't force students to open a specific type of social media account. So my experience over the years is that this has been mostly me in the feed. However, I also set up a Twitter feed with a hashtag that would go straight into the course. And there's one particular week in which we use this a lot. And I'll talk about that week in more detail. Really important aspect, a really important bit of social media was the wiki. And if I click on it, I'll show you what it looks like. So every week was a different topic. Every week had its own wiki. And it functioned more or less as a glossary or something like that the students would compose. This is the first week, so the students haven't done really anything at this point. But it kind of gives them an idea.
Welcome to the MC425 Wiki. My name is Ellen Helsper and I'm the convener of this course on interpersonal mediated communication. As part of the course, this wiki will be built up and become an important resource until the year is over and students will have completed their MSc at the LSE. This wiki is a collaborative platform managed by the students on the course. Material, such as videos and websites and links that illustrate the theories in the readings will be uploaded by the students, as well as definitions of important concepts and theories. Students are also contributing by posting questions that we will discuss during the seminars. For this introduction wiki, I have uploaded a link to Yahoo forum on which a discussion is taking place about whether there was loneliness before the internet or whether the internet has made us more lonely.
Okay, so that's the information that the students got about the wiki at the beginning. These are students, I know some of my students are actually here today, so it would be great if they, at the end, maybe also can contribute a little bit by their experience with it. But some of the students in that course had never worked with a wiki before. They all knew Wikipedia, but I guess a lot of them might not even have realized that Wikipedia was a wiki and what then a wiki is. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about how the internet and all the things that we do with social media and the digital technology, we cannot isolate them from our everyday lives, and the experience that students, that individuals bring to the classroom is very, very important, because you're not starting with a level playing field. So the other hat that I have on as a researcher here at the LSE is I look a lot at digital literacy and digital inclusion. So the distribution of resources in relation to the use of technologies. And that's where my research focus on the internet and everyday life comes from. So when I go through this talk, you will see two projects that come up quite frequently. One is the World Internet Project. Here in the UK, it's run by the Oxford Internet Institute. It's called OXIS. I've worked on this for a very long time. I've been part of the World Internet Project and still am up until this day. That is a representative survey of a population in a certain country in which we ask questions, all kinds of questions related to the internet. Users, non-users, everything. The other project that I will be talking about is this project. This is the thick report for that project. There's a million other reports for that project as well. But it's the EU Kids Online project, which also did a survey in this case, of young people from 9 to 16-year-olds. And these were all internet users. It was 1,000 people, 1,000 children in each European country, so that gave us over more than 25,000 children, and a parent of each of these children was interviewed about their internet use of their child, about their own internet use. So those two studies form kind of the backdrop to what I will be talking about today. When we talk about the internet in everyday life, and the kind of framework that I use in my own research is to think of engaging with this technology not as just something like that has to do with access. Obviously, access is important. Yeah, how fast is our broadband? Do I have Wi-Fi when I need it? Yeah, even those basic things are not always available to us. But it also has to do with the things that you can do, with skills, with literacy. And we don't just talk about the basic skills when we are talking about an educational setting. Yeah, we need other kinds of skills that we bring into that digital world as well. These things are critical skills. How do I evaluate information on its trustworthiness? How do I know about different sources? Social skills. In social media, you need to know about etiquette, about interaction, about how that works in certain platforms, in certain spaces. You also need the creative skills because, and this is one of the parts, particularly of the internet that's called social media, is that it's a platform in which you're expected to contribute, either with your thoughts or with material. Yeah? But it goes beyond that. And I hope my technology works. Yeah. It goes beyond that. It's also about our motivations to engage. This is another thing that we bring to every environment in which we engage with technology. Motivations about what does technology do with society? What does technology do with me as a person? What are the benefits? What are the negatives of it? Yeah? And then, last but not least, in whatever session that, in whichever circumstance that we are looking at, it's also about what we actually do with technology. And I often use the kind of parallel with education. Yeah? It's no use having access to a school if you don't go. Yeah? It's no use being relatively smart, yeah, and going to school, but not actually doing anything because you think it's actually school is all useless and things like that. So you might have access, you might have the skills, but if you're not motivated to learn, then a school is not a positive environment either, yeah? But let's say that there is somebody who has access to a school, who's relatively smart, yeah, who has the capability to learn, and who's motivated to learn. If they then only get, let's say, math, I doubt any of us would say that that's a good education. Yeah? And the same thing I would say about technologies. If to be fully digital, to live fully in a digital world or integrated seamlessly with our offline world, we also need to have a broad experience of all these technologies. And this in education is very important to realize that these technologies are embedded in all these kinds of different types of participation in all these different types of fields in everyday life. Now, what do we know about who participates in which ways? When we look at adults, and this is based on that World Internet Project survey that I was talking about, the people who use the internet, it's not everybody equally who does that, yeah? There's certain people who are more likely to do this than others. For example, between the ages of 36 and 45, those are, if you're in that age category, you're probably the most likely to use the internet, which might kind of go counter to this idea that we have that the internet is young people's space, okay? The most people who are the most likely to be about this. This study only goes from 18 years and older up, yeah? But this is what people do who use it daily, frequently. That's very, they're university educated, studying or employed, yeah? They're male, higher socioeconomic status, children in the household. If we read this, this is a very particular group of people who is the most likely to be using the internet. Doesn't mean that other groups are not using it, but this is where it's strongest. In the UK, London, Midlands are two regions where people are more likely to use it than in others. People with a countryside home, yeah, space, probably wealth. They tend to use it at work, at home, or mobile. The people who use it daily, they have these 3 platforms in which they continuously, seamlessly interact between work and home. It's part of how they move and where they go. What is it that people do online frequently, yeah, daily? You can see the kind of more traditional passive uses are still a lot more common. Traditional broadcast, just watching television. A lot of people say, oh, I don't watch television anymore. But then when you go and look what they do online, they watch BBC iPlayer, which is apparently not television. Yeah? Web 2.0. That might sound like a lot of social media, but it's actually mostly Facebook, yeah? Doing that. About 1/3 of us do that in this country of internet users on a daily basis. Maybe not perhaps so frequent as we thought it was. User-generated content, very, very low. Very few people use their creative skills, if they have them, to actually upload and contribute with new content. Information seeking and informal learning. These are the things that we do at a daily basis. And I think some of you might be surprised at how infrequent we do some of these things on a daily basis, things that are actually probably part of our everyday lives. When we look at young people, and this is based on the EU Kids Online study, we can see that in this, obviously taking to mind that it's 9 to 16-year-olds that we talked about. This, I'm only presenting the data for Great Britain, by the way, not for whole of Europe. Yeah? These British kids have gone online between the ages of 7 and 10. They tend to be daily users overall, and the daily users, the most likely to be daily users are older teenagers, boys and girls about equally, children who are either the only child in a household or have both parents around, plus an older sibling who is an adult, again, higher socioeconomic status, and interestingly, varying levels of education of the parent. In that sense, in terms of daily use, it doesn't seem to make that much difference in terms of just using the internet daily. Where do these children use the internet? This is the next generation that's now in secondary school that's going to be coming to universities soon. Yeah? So they live in fairly detached housing, not in big housing blocks. They live in contained housing spaces, in a village, yeah? Or in the larger city. That's where we were talking about London in this case, probably. They have mostly used it on shared PCs. Yeah? Mobile phones, yes, but only half of them. And games consoles, also quite high, but only half of them. School is the place where almost all young people use the internet. Now we'll talk a little bit about what it means using the internet at school, because that is not what it means using the internet at home. Okay, it's a very different story. But in the living room, then in the bedroom again, half of them at a friend's home. Okay? There's other locations like public spaces, but children don't tend to use it in public spaces. It tends to be either in a private space or in a very public space, which is the school, where there's always either other students around or teachers. Schoolwork, very popular, but I guess that's because they don't have a choice either, you know. Now in education, you need to kind of use the internet. A lot of them watched videos, visited social networking sites, sent emails, used instant messaging. So, and this is the things that more than half of them did. More than half of these children. So that there's another list there of things that they don't really do that often. So of all these, you can see that only schoolwork is the kind of information, practical use type thing that might be linked or is linked to an educational context. All the other stuff is what we would call social media or Web 2.0 or the more advanced things. Now, what we know from adult research into adult is that what I just sketched out is only a very basic picture. If we look into detail at how these things have developed over time and which are the groups that are most likely to engage with the internet at all, to have high quality access and high quality skills, we can see a very clear kind of divide emerging, where the combination of different factors that might disadvantage you in society also disadvantage you in that digital world. The low educated and unemployed lag quite far behind, and this is in terms of broadband uptake. Obviously, in 2003, almost nobody had broadband, yeah, so that they were still really close, but we can see these differences increasing, and especially this group here is a group that is kind of lagging behind in what, in another forum I've called kind of the emergence of a digital underclass, where there's this group of people, and that is not just restricted to access. We can see the same thing happening with skills. Yeah, this is about their estimated skill level, about how good they think they are at using it. And this is not just something that has to do with age. We did the same analysis for people between 25 and 45, and the same kinds of patterns come out. So we can see that this lower education unemployed group, yes, they've increased slightly in their perception of their skills, but it's only so far that other groups have also gotten ahead. As the internet gets more complex, you learn more things, but you kind of constantly feel like you're catching up. So this is the environment in which the internet in education is placed. It's placed in this environment where certain people are far more likely to be comfortable and engaged with technologies than others. So let me just see, because I wanted to use a little bit more of my material. I'll let my students speak for me for a bit. This was a week in which we talked about media richness and multimodality.
Well, because it showed how people utilize each medium to achieve a specific goal. Mariano links emotion as one of the most significant results of polymedia in the way it gives people the ability to reconfigure their relationships. One of the key points is that it lets user avoid negative or stressful repose while still allowing the substance to be communicated. As you can see, the protagonist's ex-boyfriend chose to break up with her over a post-it rather than using other richer media. This has nothing to do with the affordances or the limited resources he had in order to communicate with her, but rather on his moral judgment about its appropriateness. His choice of medium can translate further into the concept of shame or conventional etiquette. This can be seen as a way to mask other concerns, such as the potential of confrontation or uncontrolled emotion. Also, we see some notions of cultural idioms come into play and the way people interpret each medium for each type of message it carries.
Okay, so I wanted to use that quote because it shows that, and these are obviously students who are on this course who have been thinking about this a lot, but this shows that every day in our everyday lives, when we think about media, that we need to make choices, and these choices are not neutral, and we're often not aware that we're making these choices in terms of which media we're using for what and what is appropriate. And let's say in a classroom where people come together with very different cultures and expectations, these things might clash. And I've seen that in my own teaching, but there's also other people who have looked at this and who've studied this in more detail, where the classroom is not only a space in which you use technologies, but it's also a space in which information about technology is given to us, what they mean, what they do, how we should interact with them. And that, in that sense, technology in education is more than, am I going to use a blackboard or not? It's often the technology, discussions around technology are also the link to the outside world. So in the EU Kids Online project, for example, we ask things about what teachers actually do in relation to education about the internet, about what it is that you mean. So we can see here that a lot of these things that children have heard about in the UK have to do with rules about what to do, yeah? About safety, all these kinds of things. It's far less common that they've been helped. Now this can be obviously because a lot of young people actually use the internet without anything ever happening to them, so they need the help. But also, that second one that is less common is talking to you about what you would do if something on the internet ever bothers you. So there's a lot of talk about internet safety in general, but there's less talk about kind of what to do when something goes wrong. Or a netiquette, norms and values of how to behave online. Now, I'm shamelessly copying Sonia Livingston here, and actually I'm copying her. She's in the room, that's why I'm pointing in that direction. She was interviewed by a magazine, and this I got from the interview in the magazine, so if she actually said something else, she is here to correct it. But in a study that she's been doing around the class, where they follow a class around really, and look at how technology is integrated into the educational setting, there's two things that have come out from that, and that is kind of also reflected, I'm using her quotes here, but that's reflected in a lot of the other research that we see and what we know about how technology is used in education. It's very practical that access barrier is still there. There's endless technical problems in access and adoption, the kind of standard way in which we talk about it. But actually, when we look at a lot of the research in this area, one of the biggest barriers in terms of access is time. Time. When you talk to people, actually what they often say, and this is even worse when you start talking to them about using social media, is I just don't have time. Where am I going to learn this? This is something that I need to do in addition to the teaching or the learning that I'm already doing. Yeah? You need to not only know how to teach, you need to learn how to operate this technology. Everyone, was between quotes, parents, teachers, and students, don't really have a good idea about the sophistication and creativity that these tools might actually bring if they wouldn't be that barrier. But I think what the nice thing about this is also that often when we think about technology in education, we think about all the amazing things that technology might do. Yeah? How social media is going to connect a home and school, how it's going to connect teachers with students and parents. And actually what we see in research that there's quite a big resistance to connect in that way. Yeah? There's also a lot of potential, a lot of ideals about all the technological affordances that it gives us, but this might not actually be what we think this technology is appropriate for, and this creates some problems in education as well. So I showed you before that what kind of young people say teachers have told them about the internet. And this whole dialogue about safety and kind of education pre even going online is often around actually social media and the social aspects of it. It's not really about the information that's out there. It's about safety, about interaction, safety about social media. Yeah. So we see about a third currently gets safety information from schools. A little bit more would like to get it, but it's kind of interesting that the school is not necessarily seen as the place, yeah, for this kind of information. Okay. And often there's also this kind of dialogue. When we try to embed these technologies into education, we're also embedding it into everyday life, and it's still seen like we don't really know what to do. Is it part of it? Is it something extra? Yeah. Is it something that we're doing instead of what we really should be doing, learning for school? And if we realize that 90% of these children said they use the internet for schoolwork, yeah, still about a quarter of them also say that they spent less time than they should on schoolwork and family and friends, as the internet is somehow inhibiting them in that as well. So there is this kind of conflict between technology, between schools and parents and teachers in terms of what do we do in terms of embedding this technology into our education. Now this, another study that's just recently come out in the US is the the Pew Internet and American Life study, they do quite a lot of research on technology in everyday life, and in this case in education, where they found that there's another issue here. And this is the issue that I've been researching as well. So I'll read this quote out to you from their paper, where they say teachers of the lowest income students are more than twice as likely as teachers of the highest income students to say that students' lack of access to digital technology is a major challenge to incorporating more digital tools into their teaching. So again, we can see that teachers, not every school is the same, not all students are the same, and the differences between schools can be quite striking in terms of what students bring to the classroom. This is the data from the EU Kids Online project on how parents' education relates to what kind of advice they say they've gotten from schools. And we can see here that there's quite a big difference. Parents who have primary or less education say they get a lot less advice from schools, or less often, not less advice, but less often, than parents who are in upper or post-secondary education, or tertiary education, university education. Yeah, so there's a divide there in terms of households. Interesting thing is also that these lower educated parents don't see the schools as much as a place where they might also get some education about the internet and digital tools. They have less of that need. So this is interesting because this means that the context in which people work as teachers need to take into consideration not just the child, but the family and their social support network and the kind of motivations and attitudes that they might bring from home about not just learning, but also about technology. And this is another graph that illustrates this, is where, in general, students from households with lower educational levels have just been told less also, or say they've been told less, by their teachers about how to live on the internet or how to work with the internet. Except for when something happened. So in these contexts, might be likely, we know from other research that children from vulnerable backgrounds are also more vulnerable online, so they're more likely that something will happen to them. So there the teachers do jump in. But it's not a proactive stance. Yeah? It's something happens and we give, then they are there. So that's a big divide as well when we talk about education in general. So now I want to switch to social media and talk a little bit about social media in everyday life. Social media is a big word, or a small word for a big thing, for a lot of different things. And I think most of us, even the people who work with social media or in social media or in the digital world, don't really know what it is that we would consider falling under. So now I'm going to do something what I tell my students never to do. I'm going to go to Wikipedia and read you what Wikipedia says social media is. And I'm guessing because it's a social medium, it's okay because they're talking about themselves, right? So Wikipedia on social media. Social media refers to the means of interaction among people in which they create, share, and exchange information and ideas in virtual communities and networks. Social media depend on mobile and web-based technologies to create highly interactive platforms via which individuals and communities share, co-create, discuss, and modify user-generated content. It introduces substantial and pervasive changes to communication between organizations, communities, and individuals. Obviously, this is Wikipedia, so they're trying to also talk about how important they are. And they probably have been, let's just say, primary source of reference for a lot of people. But one of the interesting things I found there is that while we often talk about internet use as a very individual activity, social media by very nature is seen as a social activity. And sometimes that definition clashes. Because when we talk about social media, and when we talked about that safety advice that we were talking about that they often get around internet, they talk about an individual child sat in front of a device, doing something with a big world out there of 1 million individuals who are kind of anonymous almost, or a group of strangers, or kind of a blurry space. It's not really positioned in their everyday lives, which actually for a lot of these young people it is. It doesn't really reflect that much how they use technologies. And it's also quite different to the way technologies are often used in schools, where you have IT classes and you get sat in front of a computer and go and do an assignment. Yeah, go and find some information. There's very little of that kind of group-based learning using social media, which is kind of strange. Yeah, social media are used, but they're used for a lot of dyadic relationships, a lot of interactions between two individuals, the teacher and the student, yeah? Or the student and another student who they're doing their project with. It's not that more network-based idea that really comes, that community-based idea that comes out of that definition from Wikipedia. Now, I am not saying, and actually you will realize at the end, it's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying, that schools need to create communities and start inserting themselves in these social spaces. But we do need to realize that this is how these networks are used. They are not really used as one-on-one often. They're used and integrated within existing social support and social networks. So when we look in particular at social media, in this case, in the Oxford Internet surveys or the World Internet Project, this is more related to having a social network than anything else. But who are these people? They're under 25s, yeah, so young adults, single men, employed, higher socioeconomic status, with strong, intimate, and social support networks. And this is key, and this is something that we've been seeing a lot in the research that I've been doing more recently, that the use of social media is very strongly linked to being sociable, having social networks offline. You know, we could call it the rich get richer hypothesis, where people who already have a lot of contacts go online and they have a lot of contacts. So when children come, or young people come to the classroom, or students come to the classroom, what Facebook means for one student and the richness that they might get from it, for example, is a completely different thing from a student who comes from an isolated background, for example. Or who comes from a situation in which they might not be that connected to other family members, because actually social media are used a lot for our intimate relationships, more than for all these kind of wonderful relationships with strangers that we hear so much about. So while mobile platforms, iPads, mobile phones are really bigged up, in the adult population, it's actually only about a third that really uses their mobile technology for these kinds of social media. Yeah, we saw before the broadcasting and all that things are also still on the mobile media far more, so the more passive, not the active, proactive contributors of content that maybe Wikipedia was talking about in its definition. So what do they do? Basic content creation, quite frequent. And I call sending an email content creation. It's a communication, you're putting something on paper, you're putting information, you're exchanging information. Email is a social medium, let's not forget that, yeah? If there's nobody to receive your email, an email is useless, yeah? It's a social medium. Only about a quarter updates their social network weekly. So this is of internet users, adult internet users. These are our teachers, yeah? These are the parents of the kids, young people that we have in our classrooms. Passive use of user-generated content, like reading what other people or watching what other people have put up, is about 1 in 5. Contributing, this thing that was so big, and that Wikipedia's definition of social media is actually very low. It's kind of 15% or lower for all of these individual things. Like less than 50% writes a blog at least monthly. We're not even talking about weekly here, we're talking about monthly. And we can assume that if they don't do it monthly, then they probably almost never do it. Okay? Posting pictures, which we would think in this era of mobile phones where you can take a picture of everything, should be very common, is actually not that common. This contributing to discussion boards, tools that we often want to use in the classroom, those of us who are interested in integrating technologies in the classroom, the potential of discussion boards seems huge, but people are not that experienced with them. It does have quite a bit of social value in terms of meeting new people. Yeah? Some people just use social network platforms to communicate with others, not email anymore. And importantly, even the people who were online for a while and then dropped out, about 25% really had as one of the main purposes of their use of the technology that social aspect of it. So the technology has a lot of social value, but it has a lot of social value in connecting with people we already know. Social media for adults, if you look at these findings, is really a time-saving, socializing tool for offline relationships, yeah? Where there's concerns about risks of personal data misuse and a distraction from things that really matter. So again, we see that dichotomy. It's they feel relatively uncomfortable in providing personal data. But what they feel most comfortable about is not always what we would think is problematic or the opposite. So they have no problems giving their email addresses and their names, but phone number, yes, that's an issue. So we need to think about these things when we ask teachers and parents to contribute to maybe platforms that might have been set up by the school, but are part of that social media sphere that's out there. Younger people, it's a slightly different picture, but maybe not as different as you might have thought. So these are the young people, again, from the EU Kids Online project. Again, who are the people who do most with social media? And this is a range of social media that we asked about. Older teens, girls and boys equally, yeah? In terms of their skill, what they say, how comfortable they feel with using the technology. But we see some gender differences in that the girls tend to focus all their efforts on one single platform, which tend to be the social networking site, and not the other kinds of more advanced, yeah, contributing content type things that boys tend to do that more. Households, again, with an only child or where both parents are where both parents are there and they have an older sibling, highly educated, high socioeconomic and low socioeconomic levels. But it's important to say that while the higher and the lower socioeconomic levels have the same level of use, the higher socioeconomic levels tend to have more skill and feel more confidence in using these technologies. So you have to be online, but certain groups are more comfortable in using these technologies. And interesting within that group of younger people is that it's also those who feel discriminated against, those whose parents think that they belong to a group that's slightly at the margins of society, also tend to be broader users of these technologies. And since we know that offline vulnerability in terms of discrimination, in terms of vulnerability to being marginalized kind of is reflected online, this might be something that we need to take into consideration as well, because when we go on social platforms in an educational sphere, we need to make sure that that connection does not happen, because we don't want those processes to be translated into classroom, I guess. Basic content creation is again frequent. Advanced participation is also frequent. So these are the kind of things that we always think young people do. Half of them play online games, yeah, some in the virtual worlds. Advanced contribution is actually quite low again. Only 1/3 of 9 to 16-year-olds does this. Now, so then if you come into the classroom, and I'll go back to talking about how that worked in my classroom, you just cannot assume that just because somebody is young and has come from supposedly a very digital world, that they are very comfortable in creating content in a wiki or in tweeting or in stuff like that, where they actually have to stand up and do something outside of their personal sphere. So let me just go here and let my students talk again, and I can have some water.
We chose Skype as a case study because it exemplifies how the user is both isolated and connected at the same time. Isolated because the user's communicative counterpart is not physically present at the time of the conversation, but both participants are socially connected with the features of the medium. In this context, as Amici Hamburg and others point out, both introverts and extroverts make use of social services such as Skype, which are facilitated by the internet. Moreover, the video exemplifies what Grandma and others ultimately argue. The internet supplements network capital by extending existing levels of face-to-face and telephone contact.
Okay. After we did this in class, where I asked them to think about social isolation and networks and how that translates into our use of technologies, we had a long discussion about this, because we see here those people who are discriminated against, who feel socially isolated, do have quite a broad use of these media. They want to be online. And then when we talked about in the course was really about how it's not, again, just about use and access, but it's about what happens once you're on that platform. How comfortable do you feel in letting your voice being heard? How comfortable do you feel in interacting and giving your opinion? How confident do you feel in that somebody's not going to go off and have a discussion in a group and you're going to just be listening into that? And that's a lot of the research on social media that has nothing to do with education, but that we can see happening in the classroom as well. Once we start using these social media, which we think of as educational tools, these social processes are translated into that space as well. So for young people, what the kind of research shows, and this is what I've kind of got out of all the data that we have on the EU Kids Online project, it's this ubiquitous space. It is it's in the bedroom, it's at school, it's there, where the offline meets the online for better or for worse. Between half and about 3/4 of children who have been bullied see that bullying continue through social media. Yeah? So they get that is taken with them online in these spaces, when on their mobile phones, but also on their social networking platforms. So they also get all the kinds of unwelcome contexts. They might have received some sexual messages that they didn't really want to get. They got them in school, they go home, they get them on these platforms. Now, this is not to be scaremongering, because these things happen. These things have always happened. Young people who were bullied in the playground outside school also got bullied at school. Yeah, it's not like school is separate from our everyday lives, as I said before, but just like that, we need to realize that the digital technology is not separate from our everyday lives or even the school. It's a space also where adults sometimes interfere, but maybe shouldn't. There's long discussions about privacy, where a lot of people are saying, oh, young people don't care about privacy anymore. If we introduce social media into the classroom, they're just going to put everything out there and they don't care who listens and who sees that thing. Actually, there's a quite nuanced discussion going on. And we can see a netiquette developing that maybe also should be part of the discussions that you have in a classroom when you talk about the use of these technologies. How are we going to use it? In the wiki that I use for my course, there is a set of basic rules that you need to follow. Yeah, you have the right to change everybody's content, but you can't do things that on purpose that exclude other people. And because it's a social medium, this gets dealt with within the group. I actually don't interfere in that space in terms of the social interactions. The students do that themselves. They regulate that themselves. Use often outpaces the skill and knowledge about dealing with difficult situations. So while they feel quite comfortable and they do a lot of things, when there's a really difficult situation, there's not always that capability to follow up. So now I go into the last bit of my presentation, which is taking all the stuff that I talked about before into education, and especially related to social media. And here again, I'm going to talk about perceptions, and I'm going to borrow from those two studies that I talked about before, the Pew Internet and American Life study that came out last week about the use of technology in education, where we can see amongst teachers, the perceptions are that this is a connecting medium. You know, more than a majority say the internet has a major impact on their ability to share ideas with other teachers, adult to adult. Very important. The internet has a major impact on the ability to interact with parents, and say that it has such an impact on enabling their interaction with students. So the professional adult-to-adult relationships seem to be the field in which they see the most promise, or actually have experienced the most fluent interaction. The 57% that says that it has had such an impact on enabling interactions with students, it's really interesting to look at what that might actually be, that interaction. What do they see that interaction as being about? Or what is that interaction between teachers? Is this about teaching? Or is this actually, I've interacted with other teachers to feel more part of my fellow group of colleagues, and we do social things and we do other things as well. Things that you would never kind of think of doing maybe with those students. We don't really know that much about how social media are used in that sense. Not as an educational tool, but in education. The social media, what value does it have for teachers and for students and for parents that is not just about transmission of knowledge. That is about that interaction, that creation, and context sharing. We don't know that much about that. And if we don't know that, we cannot say what the value really is of these tools unless we can separate those spheres out and really understand how they are linked. That's going to be really difficult. And again, here, we can see that problem between these different spheres, our private lives, our social lives, the kind of more public thing that is teaching, the educational aspect of it. So in this same interview, Sonia Livingston said that there's two main barriers that they've observed so far, or two barriers that they've observed so far to the use of social media or these things in general, connected learning in UK schools. One is the school lockdown, where really we have this idea that mobile tools and mobile phones and social media, they can enable learning, they can be there, they can be part of it. But actually, when we look at UK schools, a lot of them don't allow cell phones in. A lot of them have blocked Facebook, social media, all these kinds of things, because they see them as something that is separate, that is interfering with teaching, that is interfering with learning, that is not part of that educational context, something that comes out outside to the inside. We saw that before in kind of the kinds of things that they teach. They teach about how proactively how to protect yourself. What in that study said is that what teachers really want to talk about is safety. They want to talk about cyberbullying. They want to talk about how to protect children when they are online. They don't really necessarily talk about it that much in an educational context and what the problems and the pitfalls are of using that in school. They want to talk about the complications of when something has happened and they've had to get law enforcement in. So there's a lot of talk about the outside world forcing its way into the classroom and needing to block that, leave that out. It's not seen as something that's part of that environment and that we know and have control over and know how to deal with. There's a resistance to de-siloing, and that's related to what I was talking about before and what the research that I've been doing in relation to social support networks and privacy and public kind of spheres where that has come out. Is there are really profound and good reasons of why children, but not only children, teachers and parents do not want the school to come into spheres that are created for our social interaction. So we might have social media, which are used, as we saw before, to create links with our offline communities, with our friends, intimate relationships, where we hang out, where we talk about things, where we protect who we are. Teachers as well, as parents, they don't want their kids to be in that space. It's not just children saying, oh, my parents can't get on my Facebook, or they can't get into my, I don't really want my parents to read my blog. Yeah, it's also the other way around. We have that discussion, and it seems a bit, I was talking with a colleague of mine before, this afternoon with Alison Powell, and what we were kind of talking about is that it would have been ridiculous to suggest that a teacher would have gone to, well, for younger students, go and hang out in the playground where the kids come after school every afternoon and talk to them about education or about things that were going on. That would have been kind of unimaginable and probably slightly creepy when we thought about it. But the way in which we talk about social media now is almost as if we're expecting that to happen as teachers to come into those social, because that's where kids are. We have to go there. It didn't used to be like that. We didn't used to think like we, as teachers, we have to go to where kids are hanging out. At a university, I wouldn't go to figure out where is it that my students are going out every weekend and then go there and, dance around them and see, gosh, what did you think about the lecture last week? And no, that's an invasion of spaces that's absolutely unacceptable. It doesn't mean that I don't sometimes go with my students to a pub, but that is an organized event within the context of education. It's probably a pub that is on the LSE campus, yeah, and we say this Thursday at 4 you're going to meet, you know that I'm going to be there, you're coming because you know that I'm going to be there, and this is the purpose of that meeting. And I think sometimes that's, for me, some of the problems with social media is that we don't really separate them out enough in terms of what they do for us in very specific educational contexts. because I think that's the most important lesson that I've learned in my own course in trying to use social media, is that when you do use them and for them to be successful, you need to be very specific, even maybe more specific than about saying this is a book and we're using this book because there's information in there, and you read it, and then you're going to have an exam about the information that it contains. Just like that, you need to think very, very carefully about what the different social media do for you. So the different elements that I had on that course, Wiki, I used the Twitter feed, I used the Delicious feed, I tried to do a discussion forum, which is sometimes more successful than others. And I think the big problem with the discussion forum is that it's like, oh, contribute with questions whenever you have one. It wasn't linked to a particular task or to a particular learning experience. The Twitter, on the other hand, was very specifically linked. And the best response and the best use of it was when I say, this week, you are going to have to send a tweet about this particular topic. And I invited everybody else from the outside, colleagues from around the world who worked on the topic of anonymity, to come in and tweet questions for the students. And what you then saw happening, because it was around a very contained area that was clearly educationally marked off, is that there was discussions that were happening between the students and these people in, some of them were in the US, some of them were in Israel and Hong Kong. These were scholars whose work they'd read. And that opportunity to interact, there is where that really got going. Before that, no contributions. But that was because there was a very specific reason for it. And I'm going to give you one more thing of my students so that you know this was about anonymity.
Shows the video of Christopher Poole talking about anonymity as we feel it considers certain key questions raised in the Twitter feed and ties it to the concepts in this week's readings.
Poole makes an argument in the favor of anonymous communities in an environment of high self-disclosure, whilst considering the possibilities of anonymous interactions in groups being liberating and offering opportunities to selectively minimize or maximize interpersonal effects, as Walter puts it.
Okay, so because the topic was anonymity and because they were asked to look at Twitter through that lens of anonymity, they were then also able to use the medium, kind of applying what they knew about social media and practice, and in that process maybe get a few skills that they did not have before in relation to social media. The same thing with the wiki. The wiki was quite structured. It was quite clear what you had to do every week. If it would have been like Wikipedia, I think that would not have happened. It also worked that it was embedded in the technology that they already used for the content for the course. Because we had long debates about whether to use the wiki, an external wiki. And again, my colleague Alison Powell, who I was talking to, she actually had her students for her course vote on which technology they were going to use. And they chose the wiki, and I think we kind of feel that that is because it is very clearly part of the course. It is a safe space to learn, and it's separated from this. Maybe some of them did do wikis outside, but this was a space for learning, for interaction with other students that they controlled. One of the things that I also made a conscious choice about, because of my experience with the research that is out there, is that I very consciously decided not to use spaces that could potentially be also private spaces for the students outside. So Facebook was a no-no for me, not even a group. Because I'm like, I am on Facebook. I'm a person on Facebook. They will know that. They cannot find me. Yeah, protected myself against that. But there's other people that are also going to be on Facebook, and I did not want to do that. Didn't mean that Facebook wasn't used for my course. You know, as a teacher, you hear rumors and you hear what students are doing. And there were some things that were coming out there that made me quite glad that I decided to steer away from that space and make that space separate. One of the things that we heard was that at a certain point, people were setting up study groups, and that some people found out that some other people had study groups and that they would not have been invited to the study groups. And there was these things going on around our course that I'm like, okay, that is, don't mean to be denigrating, that is playground politics that they're going to have to deal with. In this case, they're adult students. but it's not part of the space of my course. And I need to keep that outside, and that was also why it was a conscious choice for me not to do that. But the other thing that I was really clear, and this is where I will stop, is that different media were definitely more comfortable for certain types of students. And that complicated integrating those tools into teaching quite a lot. There was some people who were very comfortable in posting on the wiki and writing. We have a very international group of students, so language there makes a difference as well. There were other people who were very comfortable tweeting, others who weren't. And that is a kind of an extra layer on top of the complications that you already have with international students or with students who come from a variety of different backgrounds, which I think almost every type of education is now. We can't look at our class and say, oh, you are students, full stop. These tools, we need to know who's going to benefit most and try to work around that in our class. So the questions kind of that I have from, and not conclusions, but the questions that I keep struggling with when I try to incorporate these social media into my own teaching is that considering the inequalities and the experience and the skills that students have in using the internet in general and social media in particular, how can I use social media in education? If what I want is to educate everybody equally, how can I make sure that the social media don't add another barrier to this? And considering also the considerable issues in relation to the invasion of privacy and resistance to these spheres mingling, really, on both sides, my own side and the student side, yeah, and then parents, which I don't have that much to do with, but other teachers have. How can or should social media be used as a teaching tool in this context? And I think over my years of teaching, I've had some answers to that, but I'm still quite hesitant. Am I going to make a decision to have a public wiki, for example, where other people can come into outside of the course? And I think my conclusion is no, actually, because I use social media, but every social interaction, every social media has a very particular context. And I want that context of the social media in my education to be there for students to feel comfortable about that that's not a space in which the outside interferes, that they can come there in that space and learn and not also have to worry about everything else. So that was it. Half an hour for questions.
You quoted a figure, I think it was from the Pew Internet Studies of 2013, saying something like 65 or 68% of teachers said that the internet had helped them share ideas with their colleagues, with other teachers.
Yeah, that was this one.
Roughly right?
Yeah, even more than that, yeah.
Even more than that, sorry.
Yeah.
I find that very interesting, and my question is, how does that measure against your experience of a school? Do you think we're kind of behind that curve, or are we actually using technology to share ideas amongst ourselves significantly?
Okay, that's a very good question, because for me, when I saw this, I'm like, that's really high. But then when I started reading the report, I realized that they actually did not really specify what that sharing ideas meant. And that's, for me, is really, really key. Because this is the question about, do teachers use social media and technology to interact with other teachers? That's like asking, do people with that certain level of education of that specific group of people use technologies to share ideas with their family and friends? We don't know enough about what the content of that interaction is. And I think, and this was survey research. This is always a problem with survey research, and especially the Pew does these kind of really quick off the bat surveys, with good questions, but few questions. And my experience in the UK is that we might have gotten not as high a figure, but similarly high if we just ask, do you share ideas with, does it help you share ideas with teachers? Because I think that what they're referring to here is more in general about, do you hang out with other teachers? Also, there's obviously a social desirability aspect to it. We want to be seen as being part of this community with our colleagues and stuff like that. So I don't really have the answer to that, in terms of a number, but I expect that it might be the same in the UK, especially in those schools of high educated, nice neighborhoods where these tools are present. But I can't tell you what it is that they share ideas about, if that's the...
Okay, thank you. You did make a point earlier, but also email is social media.
Yeah, email is a
Maybe
social media. Yeah.
I'm going to hand over to questions from other people. Can I ask you to wait for the mic? You don't need it in this room. It's just so that your question can be heard on the live streaming.
Any questions? Can I ask if somebody else has any, then since I am mic'd up, I can talk whenever I want, right? If anybody else here in the room has had experience with using these kinds of social media and what their problems have been, or is there anybody who has had? Yeah, can I just like to know?
Yes, I have used Wiki, but I teach languages, and the use is very focused. So usually it's for particular task in which the students, they need to produce a document.
Mm-hmm.
So they work using the Wiki to produce that document either in groups of 3 or more students. So it's usually very focused. And I think what you were saying for me is very important is, as teachers, you need to know why you are using that tool in order for students to know why they are using them.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, they need to use how to use them. So we need to teach them also how to use in the class.
Yeah.
So I think it's not only assuming that they know the tool, because in many occasions they don't know. So we need to explain that why it's useful to use a wiki and not to use email, for example.
Yeah.
So I think that is my experience. And
Yeah.
using others, Delicious also. They are using Delicious to produce their own bookmarks relating to different topics they are working on.
Yeah.
So for example, that is another way.
Do these students use Delicious outside for other purposes, do you know?
No, in fact, none of them use Delicious. They don't know any, Mendeley, other kind of social bookmarking. They don't know any of them. So it was very interesting because I think some of them they have started to use for other courses. But the point is like this idea that the students know, they don't know. So in many occasions, they haven't been around those tools at all.
Yeah.
So that is my experience.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. And for me, the first week, just some technical information about how LSE works, I guess, or at least in my department. My course was first, when it started, was in the second term. I teach on a master's program, which is a year master's program, 3 terms, was in the second term. Then they've moved it to the first term. And this caused all kinds of problems. Because first of all, normally courses that were taught in the first term did not have a seminar group the first week. So we had a lecture, but no interactive seminar group. And I had to fight, and I had to say, listen, I cannot do this course using this technology if I don't have that first week to talk about the technology, to actually get them comfortable with it. The other problem with it being in the first term, I got that first week, fine. Other problem is, in that first week, it's not just about my course and technology that they're learning, they're completely confused. I think that the students who are here can confirm that. Or at least a lot of them are completely confused about a new school, a new system. So, and then adding this on top of it was really, really, really complicated. So I'm actually moving it back. I fought again, I'm moving it back to the second term. But I think for me, every year this happened, and every year I'm kind of surprised and I don't know why. When you ask them, have you used Wikipedia? Yes, yeah, we all know Wikipedia. And then I go, well, you're not allowed to reference it anymore in class, but why is that? Let's see how it works, because you're going to have to create a wiki for this course. And it kind of changes their idea of also of what education is, because normally you produce an essay, that's it, you get graded on the essay, you hand it in, you do your work, you do your writing, you get graded on it. The thing that's hardest for students is the social aspect of it, the fact that they might put something down and somebody else is going to come and change it. But actually, that might not even be the most difficult thing. For them, it's the fact that they have to go into something that has already been written, that is there, that is content, and that they're going to have to go and change something that somebody else has written. For them, is quite scary because it's not an educational situation that they've been in. You know, you're used to commenting on your friend's stuff, but not on something that somebody probably worked really hard on, somebody whose language might not have been English, as a first language, who put that on, who put a lot of effort in, and then you're going to come on as a fellow student. What kind of right do you have to change that content? And it's that those social dynamics of it, which have to do with status and hierarchy, and and that's where actually in an intercultural environment it's quite difficult, because there's very clear cultural differences in how comfortable people are in changing text produced by others, or in changing thoughts and ideas produced by others, and how do you do that? So and every time I go in, and I think there's always like, I don't know, the students here who took my course, there was 3 people who'd ever done a wiki?
Yeah, I think in our class it was just Carrie.
Carrie. Carrie Wong, who's sitting in the back, she was my wiki editor this year, the moderator. So that's the kind of environment that we're trying to use these social media in, and that was quite difficult. Yeah.
Just on that same subject, do you think that the problem or difficulty there is to do with knowing the people whose work you're changing? Because I'm just thinking from a personal perspective, if I go into, for example, I work on Moodle, and the Moodle documentation is a wiki. Anyone can change that. And so if I see something in there that isn't explained very well, I go in and I change it, and I don't care because I don't know the person who wrote the original. Whereas all of our team notes and minutes and everything are also kept on a wiki. And if I was going to go into that and change something substantial, I wouldn't. I would go and speak to the person first and think, you know what, I would like to do this, and is that okay with you?
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's the barrier, is the fact that you know the person that you're going to screw up the work of.
I think that could work two ways. Because on the one hand, because you know the people, you know they're all students, you've been put in this educational context, so you know, and that's why the wiki is not a public wiki, it's a wiki. You know people are going to make mistakes. I actually built in exercises where in 1 week, students have to go in and go back over the weeks, correct anything that's wrong, to force them to get used to this, but also to, on purpose, insert a mistake that then the next group has to find and correct. So they get used to the idea that there's going to be issues, and it's their responsibility to find it. But because they know the other students, they know they're in the same situation, that is, I think, actually quite comfortable. And I think if you tell students with their hat on as students to go to a public platform, which might be full of people who actually know what they're talking about, because it's written down, that might actually be more of a barrier, because there's an expert on social media who wrote the social media entry on Wikipedia. That's a lot more difficult, I think. So it can work both ways. I think you as a professional who has, probably for yourself also, a certain confidence in putting stuff up there and knowing that you're right when you do it. I don't necessarily know that students necessarily have the confidence when they put stuff up there to know that's right and that they have the knowledge. So there needs to be a space in which you're actually allowed to make mistakes or expected to make mistakes. I don't know. Oh, there's somebody here as well. Oh, sorry.
Just to follow on, couldn't you just comment anonymously?
Yeah, but so this is the interesting topic about anonymity. We all think that anonymity liberates us from these status and that we then just go up. But actually, in reality, it doesn't really. And if you want to do it in a teaching context, obviously I need to see what you want to give feedback on what they've done, so that would be slightly problematic. You could say, okay, I'm not going to know which student did it. But actually what you realize is that because for a very long time, the students didn't know that I or Carrie or somebody else could see who had edited the wiki. You can actually see that quite easily. But they didn't know. So for quite a few weeks, the students thought that they were editing the wiki of other people anonymously. But there's still that barrier. So I think it's because of the things that we take with us, like a lack of confidence. And that's why we need to know who our students are and where they are. Because otherwise, it's the confident students who, kind of, even if they don't know, they think they know and they go out and contribute, while the students who might know but are less confident are not going to be engaging that much. So I wanted to create a more level playing field within the...
Yeah, I mean, I've done something similar recently. We just use Google Docs.
Yeah.
In Google Docs, you can't tell who's done what.
Yeah.
So you don't get the revisions that you get in a wiki, but you write it more collaboratively in a shorter timescale, and everyone just chips in when they feel like it, and no one can see who's done what. So to assess it would be a lot harder, but
yes.
to write the document.
Well, also to learn from, I think it's because it's collaborative, but you don't know who you're collaborating. I don't know, for me, the social aspect of it, that it's your platform, that you own it, that you create it together is very important, because otherwise, for me, it's also been really difficult to get students to be engaged. If they can't be seen, then some of them might not contribute.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because I want this to be part of the learning experience. And if you don't contribute, then that's a little bit difficult.
First, I think I would like to thank you for a very nice talk. And I really like the way you structured it, talking about the internet in everyday life and education, and also social media in everyday life and education, sort of pointing at that specific link between everyday life and education. But I think there are two different discussions here, and you sort of draw upon data from the UK survey with children 9 to 16 years old. But we are at the same time discussing social media in higher education. So I just wanted you to reflect on what is the differences or maybe the similarities between using social media in higher education and primary or secondary school?
Yeah. I think some of the issues like the de-siloing is going to be very, very similar. So the idea that the people still want these spaces to be separate, even though I think that's going to be very similar in higher education as it is in secondary and primary school. I don't think that's the problem. One of the things that might be more complicated, less complicated in a higher education context is this idea of that we need to lock it down. Students are not allowed to use social media and things like that. But interestingly enough, and again, I'm speaking now from my own experience here because I haven't done much research in the higher educational context at universities. But for me, it was very interesting that whenever I would teach a course and I wanted them to come in with their technology, to participate, to do something on the wiki, to tweet, I needed to very specifically say, next week you have to bring your device. You have to bring something with which you can go online, edit, bring it into the classroom. And there was still a lot of students, they didn't do that naturally. And I was we had a conversation this afternoon with the Center for Learning Technologies about this, why is that? You would think, you're hooked up all the time. Why do you not bring it into the classroom? Well, there's a few things. First of all, a lot of them probably come from a context in which they were explicitly told not to bring it. Then I know that I might say, I want you to bring your mobile phone, iPads, tablets, whatever, but my colleagues might not want that. Yeah, so there's a different clashes in culture there within an institution. And also, I think, and that has to do with management, where students, where you could see that in the younger, so that's similar, where they also see it as something, there's this struggle between, well, but it's also very distracting and, using social media or using and then I'm going to be on Facebook, and there's a whole issue about managing time and being able, that we are all struggling with as professionals, as students, as to control these spaces. Because you bring your laptop in, you bring the world in as well, not just that, not just the platform that you're using for the education. And how good we are at separating those spheres, those boundaries, is quite difficult. So I think there's also a little bit of fear that it might be a little bit too addictive once you have it there to bring it in. So I think there's culture clashes. But I think that we assume, maybe rightly or wrongly, that the students who come in know their safety training, or that we are not responsible for the bullying as much as we are. Maybe we should be more worried, I don't know. But any more questions?
Ellen, we're following on Twitter here, and we've got a couple of questions,
okay,
I think, that have come in. There's quite a lively, there's obviously a lot of people watching online, if you want to say hello to them. But we've got someone called Karen Johnson who's asked a few questions. One which was about at university how you've had to teach students to use some social media sort of professionally, and do you think that this is something that actually should have been done at school? So that was one question. Sonia, is there?
Yeah, sorry. The other one is, do you not feel you are abdicating your responsibility to develop students' digital literacy by not using familiar mainline social media?
I think they mean Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, first, I guess they're a little bit related in a way, but about whether schools, as in secondary schools, should have a responsibility to teach that, and whether we should teach them how to use it professionally. I would say yes. Yeah, I would say definitely yes. And actually, there's a lot of it's a bit strange because my course is about interpersonal mediated communication. So this is part of what we talk about in the course. It's about, privacy management. It's about, so it's maybe not teaching them how to manage, but they hopefully can translate that to their own lives as well, and not just to the research. So for me, as part of my course, it's kind of natural that that gets taught, and I think it should be taught at university, but definitely at primary schools and secondary schools. It should be part of it. But I think there is this kind of thing that, Sonia Livingston mentioned in her interview, which is really interesting, that there is a little bit of this fear idea around it. So if we can do that, talking about this is another skill that you have to learn, just like you have to learn how to cross the road. Yeah, if you want to get to school, you have to go through a lot of dangerous situations. Let's deal with it. You want to find a job, here are the structures. These are the things that how you present yourself. These are things that we've taught young people for a very long time, and that is no different because it's online. And then the second question was about me abdicating my responsibility. I mean, my other hat is the digital literacy inclusion hat. But I don't think that I should be doing that as part of my course, yeah? So I don't think I should be teaching those skills in my course on those platforms, but I do think that as a teacher, I need to be equipped when students come and talk to me about, I'm an academic advisor, we have people who, at the university, for example, who deal with people who might have issues that they need to talk about, to incorporate into that a knowledge and an experience with how that works out in the digital world. So if a student will come to me and say, like, I'm feeling extremely lonely, it's not working, I'm having a really hard time studying, then for me it will be logical in that conversation to also see what's going on Facebook in this case, or on any other social platform. That would be part of my horizon of talking to students. And maybe there we can do a little bit more, to see it as, in general, as part of an advisor's role, to also think about how do you deal with it. And I think here at the LSE as well, in the introduction weeks, there are the library and information services, they have technical stuff, but we might not necessarily be equipping them in terms of etiquette, in terms of interaction. And I think that we could do a little bit more maybe to integrate that more into, just in general, the advice that we give to students, because it's part of everything we do, not just in the educational context. I think I have to run off. Right, yeah. One more question, or what was the? Okay, yeah, okay. Obviously, you can tweet questions to me if you have anything, or you want to continue, or want to get hold of any of the work that I've referred to in the presentation. Thank you.